Luke, what's up, dude?
I am absolutely pumped to be here, my man. I'm pumped that you've got a podcast, and I'm pretty excited to be talking about all things Bitcoin today. Thanks for having me.
It's a long time coming, my friends. This is one that I have been visualizing since the very early days. I know we were both talking about how we were getting more into this, and you were a guy I always wanted to bring on. A big reason being because I frequently cite you as the man, if I had to choose one, who really pushed me over the edge on Bitcoin and getting rid of all the altcoins that I was holding back in 2021. So I would love to hear about your adventure you've been on. I know you've been traveling and doing all that, but first of all, I want to really, let's say, go back to where I was at that point, and let's rehash it, and I will act as if I'm one of the many millions of people who are in the same shoes as I was at that point, and we can just have you toxify them just like you did to me. It'll be beautiful. So, just to recap, Twitter Spaces is what changed my life big time. So 2021 was a year for me where I was on the fence figuring out like what is real here. I had a bunch of shit coins, I had a little bit of Bitcoin, I was still figuring it out. I come into Twitter Spaces and I see Luke, I see Magoo, I see Tao, Phil, TC, Wicked, Nesky, Matt Coons, all these guys who were super helpful. I come in there and say, dude, it can't just be Bitcoin, right? Like, look, there's so many utilities. Like, what about this digital ownership? Like, Bitcoin, I've heard it's slow. It's like, it's the old tech. So, give me just your full from zero pitch on why you are all about Bitcoin, why the world needs it, and why you're so passionate about it.
Definitely. So, firstly, Twitter Spaces, that was so long ago, 2021. I remember I don't have many followers now, but I remember in Twitter Spaces, I literally had like maybe 50 followers when I first joined Spaces. So, that was great fun, just learning on the fly and talking to people like yourself in the early days. But my pitch for altcoins versus Bitcoin, I keep it very, very simple. I ask anyone, okay, what is the innovation that Bitcoin has actually done? What's it done to the world? Well, I believe for 5,000 years, the global monetary system has been a proof of stake based system. So, whether we've used gold as money, silver as money, or today paper backed money, if you were powerful and if you had more stake or more money than someone else, you were inevitably able to actually corrupt the rule set of the monetary system. And I believe Bitcoin's big innovation is for the first time in 5,000 years, we have a monetary system that cannot be influenced by the rich. It has all the same rules for every 8 billion people on the planet, and nobody, no matter how much stake they have, can change Bitcoin's rules. So I believe that's the innovation that Bitcoin has, and it is innovative because nobody can attack it or change its rule set. Now, I believe this is very different to the other 22,000 altcoins you see around the world. I believe all of them can be controlled by the rich people, and they will be attacked, and they can be attacked, and they're not decentralized enough to withstand that attack. So I believe all of the 22,000 altcoins are just simply digital representations of fiat. They are recreating the problem that Bitcoin actually that Bitcoin solved in 2008, 2009. So that's I always start at a very high level whenever I'm doing an altcoin versus Bitcoin discussion, and we just take down the FUD piece by piece.
Perfect, man. And that's pretty much where I was at, where I didn't understand that money is truly a winner take all game. And
Mm.
another thing that really flipped in my head, a switch that flipped, was that all these altcoins, they say that they have different utilities in Bitcoin, they're doing different things because they can't say that they're money competing with Bitcoin because they would obviously lose in every single category. So what do you say to that? The fact that, oh, Ethereum, you can trade or you can have digital ownership of a JPEG or of a, you know, the NFT people will say like, oh, it's more than just JPEGs. You could put your house on a blockchain. You could put art on a blockchain. You could put this and that on a blockchain. Doesn't that seem valuable, Luke? Why isn't that a good thing to have?
So there's something called the Oracle problem. So you can create your own rule set in the digital space, but you need to actually somehow enforce that rule set into the real analog world. So what Bitcoin does, which is very unique and something we've never seen before, is Bitcoin creates digital scarcity in cyberspace with proof of work mining in the analog physical space. There is nobody who can kind of stop or change the rules, or you need to trust to actually take that conversion of analog energy and put it into digital cyberspace, absolute scarcity, 21 divided by everything divided by 21 million, infinity divided by 21 million. Now, everything else in the altcoin space, there's this thing called the Oracle problem, where an oracle doesn't actually know what's happening in the physical world. So, for example, if you want to tokenize real estate on the Ethereum blockchain, that's great. And you could tokenize your house on the Ethereum blockchain. But what if somebody steals that NFT on the Ethereum blockchain and you're living in your house? All of a sudden, you need to actually trust somebody outside of that smart contract that has digitized or tokenized your real estate to actually try to enforce the law and say, okay, what's the truth here? So that is the Oracle problem in a nutshell. I'm not a technical expert, so please, if anyone's listening who is a technical expert, let me know in the comments down below why that is wrong, because I'm just, regurgitating what I have heard the Oracle problem is. But if we even take this step one step further, when we're talking about tokenizing assets and smart contracts on Ethereum, surely that's useful. Surely it has utility, and you could make a case for saying yes, smart contracts have utility. But if you're building smart contracts on a monetary blockchain that is permissioned and can be controlled by the rich and can censor your transactions, I don't believe anything that you're building at a higher level has any value, because you're building on quicksand. You're building on top of a foundation that can be corrupted and can be broken. I mean, we have so many countless examples of things going wrong. Like, for example, in 2022, lots of Venezuelans and Iranians who were actually using the MetaMask wallet, they had their funds frozen. Okay, so they were using the Ethereum wallet, MetaMask, which is the most popular one. They were using this MetaMask wallet on the second most decentralized blockchain, which is supposed to be Ethereum. And they actually had their transactions frozen and their wallets frozen because the United States government said, well, we actually have sanctions against Iranian citizens and Venezuela citizens. So Ethereum, we need you to censor those transactions. And that's exactly what happened. Now, if that's happening on the second most decentralized blockchain, I hope I've illustrated my point. The rest of the blockchains are even worse. We could talk about it for hours, but just imagine Solana. How many times have they had like a forced closure, or they've had to halt the blockchain? I believe that's over 10 times now. So I really hope I made the case that every other altcoin is permissioned, centralized, and it's just a digital replication of the current fiat system.
Yeah, and that was just one of the eye-opening points for me, was that all of the marketing that Ethereum, and we always focus on Ethereum because it's like a cliff after that. That's like by far the highest of the second. After that, it's just complete trash. But their whole marketing pitch is that it's decentralizing it, it's taking out the middleman, but time after time that's proven to not be the case. They are just a new middleman. It's just the Ethereum Foundation, instead of whatever your local jurisdiction is, using the House example to decide these legal disputes. They're not going to take like a link to a blockchain as proof, because that's like they don't work that way. Like, the real world does not do these things. And this is one of the things that I talked to Peruvian Bull about in the last episode. He really mentioned how every altcoin is starting from a place of not having decentralization out of the gate, because they're all pre-mined super blatantly. There's a clear owner of the majority of the tokens. Ethereum had a 70% pre-mine. And then after that, they have to immediately try to catch up by creating something that they can be better at than Bitcoin. So they all go super speed fast. They only have a few real archival nodes, I believe they're called, and they start doing just all these derivatives like immediately. It's just a new derivative casino, and they point at the utilities that they can do, but these are all just done better in a centralized way. And that was probably the ultimate mind-blowing moment for me, was, oh wow, like, centralization isn't evil. It works really well for almost everything. It's the reason why all the services we use are so well-oiled machine-like, and everything works properly. This video conferencing platform we're using, it works great because it's a single company. They have customer service. It's it's meant to be centralized, a decentralized, uh, platform for watching movies or streaming or buying houses. It's just a mess, and it
Mm.
still has the centralized entity of whatever the blockchain owner is. So there's just no point at the end of the day. Would you agree with that? Is that how you would summarize it? Anything you'd add?
Summarized it beautifully, my man. That's exactly how I think about it. Money needs to be decentralized. I believe money is one of the few things in the world that has to be 100% decentralized and 100% incorruptible. And then on top of that, you can build all of these services. You can build peer-to-peer exchanges on layer 2s and layer 3s. But you have free market competition and capitalism spring up. So all of these centralized peer-to-peer exchanges that are made in a centralized fashion, they compete for business and market share in the free market. And if a centralized actor plays up, or if, for example, the Riverside centralized browser that we are using today fucks with us, for lack of a better words, we're going to go and choose a different centralized option. Okay, it's okay to have centralized video browsers. Okay, it's free market competition. Somebody's going to make a better alternative. Same thing with YouTube. If YouTube censors this discussion because of my heavy Australian accent and deep conspiracy theories, we can go and post this on BitChute or Rumble or a different,
Nostr soon, hopefully.
bingo. Now we're
Hmm.
talking. Now we're talking.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's how I think of it, my man.
Love it, dude. So I think this is a good time to transition a little bit more into Bitcoin in the overall scheme of money. And I appreciate you hearing me on the quick shitcoin distinguishing summary of summarizing, man, hours and hours of space calls that I was coming back from my fiat mining job every night, just excited to jump on there and just throw myself into that. So that was a fun time, man. I really appreciate it again. Let's move into the winner take all idea I briefly mentioned earlier, how everything will essentially be sucked up into the best possible money we have. And I would say roughly the players right now are fiat money, like government mandated fiat currency. We've got gold, we've got Bitcoin, we've got all the altcoins saying we're the new money. Tell me why Bitcoin is the winner of that battle and why that will be the next phase shift of how humanity transact value in the economy.
Yeah, so 5,000 years of monetary history. Money is a winner take all. We've seen it throughout all of these different monetary competitions: gold versus silver, silver versus glass beads. The yappies, island stones. Every single time a better money comes along, it takes 99% of the store value market cap. Okay, so that's the biggest thing to think about it. Money is a winner take all in the realm of storing value. Like, for example, today we live in a little bit of a historical anachronism where we kind of have all of these different things that have large market caps because nobody knows where to put their money. Okay, I'm going to put some money in real estate because I think it's scarce. A lot of people are doing that without actually inherently understanding that they're doing that. They're not putting their money in fiat because it's not a good store of value. So it's really strange. Today we have $900 trillion of wealth in the world. That's if you ignore the derivatives market. We can get even more crazy and even more bullish when we start trying to factor in the derivatives market into calculations for what Bitcoin and what crypto's total addressable market cap could be. But I like to be a little bit grounded, a little bit conservative, and push those derivatives off to the side. So you got $900 trillion of wealth out there. And if we believe Bitcoin is what it is, and if we believe it is the superior store of value, which after 14 years of more recent digital currencies, that's what Bitcoin is. It is the dominant digital store of value for the world. That means I believe Bitcoin has the largest total addressable market cap in human history. So Bitcoin is a technological revolution that has the largest economic total addressable market cap in history. People don't, consider that. They think, okay, what's my smart contract platform worth? I've written a paper on comparing the different total addressable market caps between Bitcoin and crypto back in 2021, I think. And I was making the case that, okay, let's be bullish on crypto. Let's assume that a different alternative blockchain like Ethereum facilitates all of this trade and it tokenizes assets. And, we have NFTs sprung up everywhere, and NFTs are the future. They're backing all of the tickets for sports game. Let's be bullish. Let's assume all of this works out. Let's assume Ethereum is not centralized. Let's assume that the governments don't attack Ethereum. Let's assume that Vitalik doesn't rug pull the project. What's the total addressable market cap for a successful blockchain that's trying to be the world computer or digital oil? That's another one I've heard, which just gets me really going. It's a ridiculous analogy. Let's be bullish. What's the TAM for something like that? Even when I'm being very bullish and very favorable to the altcoin space, I can't make a case for why a blockchain like that would have a total addressable market cap bigger than $5 trillion. And people think, no way, that's crazy. But think about it. How much of that $350 trillion real estate market is actually made up of the transactions, okay? Like when we're talking about everything digital, it's a race to the bottom. So all of your apps on your iPhone today, Jeff Booth makes a great case that if there is a profit margin to be attacked, entrepreneurs are going to compete for that profit margin and they're going to dwindle it away until it's absolutely zero. Now, I see the same thing happening in the, let's say, alternative blockchain space, if that's even a thing. My base case is everything gets built upon the sound monetary layer that is Bitcoin. But let's imagine a world where we have competing blockchains. Even if you have like a Solana versus an Ethereum versus like a Casper, all of these different layer 2 blockchains, layer 1 blockchains, sorry, imagine them competing with each other. It's just going to be a race to the bottom in fees. So even if one's successful, I can't make a case for
centralization. They're going to
Exactly.
centralize down to be able to compete, because a decentralized beast is impossible to manage. They need to be able to manage the project to compete against these other ones. So even in the most bullish possible case, they're all just going to end up getting more and more centralized over time, which again just removes the whole point of why we're here in the first place. So that's a great point. And another thing that you mentioned a bit earlier there that I wanted to elaborate on was how since fiat money is so trash and it's just a melting ice cube, as Saylor always puts it, as people put their money in all these other places just to try to escape that inflation, and real estate is a classic example, it drives those prices up. So as all these rich people are ditching their fiat money or fiat currency, sorry, Mike Maloney, fiat currency into real estate, that's driving the price up. So it makes it impossible for anyone to buy a house. And that's the reason why all these millennials and Gen Z are just looking at these prices on Zillow, just thinking there's no possible way I can ever own a home. And it all comes down to the money. Would you agree?
Yeah, the money is broken. I'm doing a video right now on a shipping container in Canada that's been remodeled and repurposed into a house. That puppy's selling for literally 2 million Canadian cuck bucks. The money is broken and it's just being stored in all of these other ridiculous places.
It's crazy, man. So let's shift into your bullish case, because you are very well known on Twitter as being very bearish on the Bitcoin price. So it's been a while since I've listened to, I think Cedric Youngelman's pod, the Bitcoin Matrix pod, was the last time I listened to a full walkthrough from you. But I want to hear, I haven't actually even looked in a few days or even a week or more. It's probably around 30,000. It's been there for a while. What do you see coming up in this future we're all speculating on that will change that price, and what will be the breaking point that really causes that hyper Bitcoinization scenario so many of us are predicting?
Yeah, so money is a winner take all. I think the listeners are actually prepared well for this discussion. Sometimes people are a little bit triggered by my bullish rants and the numbers that I throw out there, and they call me a hopium dealer. But let's assume, Bitcoin is the dominant store of value, let's assume that it does actually start eating into that $900 trillion of wealth in the world that is seeking a superior store of value. So I ran what I call some conservative calculations back in a 2021 article, and I made the case, okay, let's assume we move to a hyper-Bitcoinized world. Okay, again, just a thought experiment. I believe in this world, I don't think it's outrageous to believe that Bitcoin can capture half of the world's wealth. So we got 100 trillion in fiat, 100 trillion dollar in bonds. We got a 350 trillion dollar real estate market, which is absolutely ridiculous. And the calculations I ran in that paper show that the true value of real estate before the gold standard was like 70 trillion. So think about the monetary premium that's available in the real estate market. And then we have other asset classes like gold, etc. And I said I believe Bitcoin could potentially capture $450 trillion of market cap volume if we do transition to a hyper Bitcoinized world. But then I got a little bit more bullish and I said, okay, well, if you believe there could potentially be $450 trillion of demand for Bitcoin, you need to actually factor in the Bitcoin multiplier effect. So because there's a limited amount of coins, 21 million, most people believe that when they do their little maths calculations, they assume that all the 21 million coins are available for sale, and that's not true. So because Bitcoin's very scarce, because 78% of the Bitcoins haven't moved in the past year, what that means is for every $1 that tries to flow into Bitcoin and tries to, get some Bitcoin, it actually pushes the Bitcoin market cap up by today 3.7x. And if you look at the past 5 years of data on this Bitcoin multiplier effect, it's averaged around 3x. So now we need to go back to our maths calculation and apply that 3x multiplier. So $450 trillion of demand with a 3x multiplier. Quick back of the napkin kind of maths on a live stream. I believe that's something like 1.3 quadrillion-ish dollar market cap. And then you can use that market cap divided by the 21 million coins because you've applied the market cap, the multiplier effect, and you end up with a price tag for Bitcoin around $64 million per coin. I remember the number because that's the number I ran in the maths in that 2021 article. So I believe that's probably a fair valuation for Bitcoin. $64 million in today's dollars. I always like to really, confirm that with people because most people think I'm talking about hyperinflation. Oh, no, baby. I'm talking about the wealth in the world today. The real numbers in 10 or 20 years' time are going to look even more absurd if you're trying to price it in fiat. So the way I kind of anchor that for people is I say, okay, where's the pristine real estate in the world? I think it's the Malibu beach house on the coast of California. Those puppies go for about $10 million a pop these days on average. If Bitcoin's $64 million a pop, you're looking at one Bitcoin buying you 6 Malibu beach houses. That's the purchasing power kind of equivalent that I think Bitcoin should have on a Bitcoin standard. But then people say, okay, how long is it going to take to get there? $64 million Bitcoin, I'm not going to see that in my lifetime. I don't believe that's the case. Let's get a little bit more bullish because I actually believe Bitcoin is going to be adopted a lot quicker than most people believe it is. So why do I say that? Well, every single technology that has gone mainstream forever in history, it gets adopted in an exponential curve. So that could be the steam engine, railways, electricity, the automobile, podcasting, smartphones, the personal computer. They all get adopted in an exponential S-curve kind of fashion, okay? And if you look at the past 3 or 4 technological innovations that have been adopted in the past 50 years, I kind of took an average. I didn't take it. Somebody put a beautiful chart together. I don't know where it came from, but they said on average, they looked at the smartphone, I think broadband internet, and I think the personal computer. I don't think that one's correct, but they looked at something. And they said on average, it takes around 10 years to go from 0 to 10% adoption. But then you hit kind of an inflection point and the adoption begins to go exponential as that technology gains sufficient network effects. So then it takes the same amount of time. So another 10 years to go from 10% adoption to about 90% adoption. So that is essentially mainstream. Now, I think I might have been one of the first people to apply that lens or that framework onto Bitcoin. And I believe, firstly, it's very hard to measure what Bitcoin's adoption is because you could measure Bitcoin by its awareness. You could measure Bitcoin by how many people have used it or touched it. And then you could measure Bitcoin by saying how many people have put 50% of their net worth into Bitcoin. So many different ways. But I like to just zoom out and look at kind of a, big picture viewpoint. I believe that Bitcoin is kind of close to that inflection point. Now, that inflection point happens at around 10%, so between 8 and 12% on a technological adoption S-curve. And I think it's interesting that Bitcoin has been around for, 14 years now? So if you're looking at Bitcoin with the same framework of the previous 3 technological adoption curves, Bitcoin's probably on a timing basis pretty close to hitting that inflection point. And I actually believe there's lots of data, there's lots of things popping up in the Bitcoin data that suggest that since 2020, Bitcoin has actually pushed through that inflection point. And I think we're in that phase of exponential adoption. It's just most people aren't aware of it. So I'll pause there for a minute. I can easily rant for another 20 minutes on that, but I'll let you get a word in.
This is always a rant-friendly space, my friend. You know this. Adding on to that, I would say the friction to people adopting it is just non-existent. Like all of the older innovations you've looked at throughout history, there's some sort of friction there, whether it's this really expensive new tech, or people are still figuring out how to use it, or there's not enough infrastructure for it to happen. For Bitcoin, all you have to do is pull up Cash App and buy, or any other of these exchanges, or you could just go straight into the P2P marketplace and just whip up Wallet of Satoshi or Blue Wallet or Moon Wallet and just start using it. There's zero friction. I would say the only friction is just the amount of nonsensical noise being pumped into everyone's ears by all the fiat scammers trying to obfuscate some different flavor of fiat to try to prevent it from taking off. Because fiat just rewards these people in positions of power. So basically all the fiat powers right now are incentivized to stop this, because what Bitcoin does, as you mentioned earlier, is it removes that money to power connection. There's still going to be rich people on Bitcoin, of course. Saylor has a shit ton of Bitcoin. He's going to be very rich. That's because he took the risk and he bought a lot of it early, and he's put up with all kinds of crap for it. I want those people to be rewarded, because he's not going to get any extra power. And I personally think that he's going to be a great steward of that. He's talked many times about how he has all these incredible plans of just decentralizing education, trying to make the world a better place. So I personally think it'll be great, but even people that hate people like him, you have to admit, he doesn't get to change the network at all. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. Would you view that in the same way?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing people miss. There's so many people hating on Michael Saylor, but he can hold $5 billion worth of Bitcoin. He can't change the rules.
Yep. It's powerful stuff, dude. It's a whole new paradigm that we're not used to. So a note I took over here was that I love coming back and just hearing people talk about inflation, because I feel like that's the most important thing that a lot of people in the normie world do not understand. We talk about it constantly here in Bitcoin, but ever since I started listening to Jeff Booth, as you also referenced, it's really become a very cornerstone part of my conversations with my friends outside of this realm, because everyone seems to sense that things are getting more expensive, it's getting harder to live, but they haven't really connected how absurd it is that as we get better technology and better supply chains and this incredible ability to all work together with our phones, we should be having this amazing teamwork and abundance everywhere, but it's becoming harder to live. So could you talk about just your basic definition of inflation and how that's going on in the world right now, how it's evolving, how it's changing people's lives?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. We're living through the first global inflation spike in the digital age. So I am very, very interested to see how social media plays into this inflation spike. The last serious global inflation spike we saw was in the 1970s a little bit. That was more, US domestically kind of based. But in the 1940s, we saw a broad inflation spike. Now, you have to ask yourself, why did we see that inflation spike in the 1940s? Well, that was because the governments all around the world had more debt than they actually have today. Actually, today we have a little bit more debt than we did in the 1940s. And whenever a government gets too much debt, we have 52 examples over the past 250 years of economic history that shows us what a government does to deleverage its balance sheet. All the government does is simply print money, devalue the money, and pay back the debt with the devalued dollars. But when they do that, and when they do print a bunch of money, they essentially create this massive risk-off environment, create a massive asset bubble, and you get inflation everywhere. So I believe the inflation we're seeing today that has popped up since 2020 and actually does look very sticky all around the world. Okay, ignore what you're seeing in America with them claiming inflation's 3% and they've beaten inflation. That's baloney, absolute baloney. If you look at the shadow stats figures, you can see inflation in America today is still 8%. So the government statistics are absolutely faulty. They're absolutely lying. Look at the way the governments used to measure inflation, still 8%. But the global average of inflation, what our governments admit to, is 9% inflation. So real inflation, I believe, is 20% globally, if you look at an average. And you've got to ask yourself, okay, what's going on? Is inflation going to come back down? Is it going to come back to normal? I don't believe so. I believe that as we cross 2020, I think of 2020 as a monetary chasm. So again, on that technological adoption curve, you have an inflection point where technology goes mainstream. I think Bitcoin has kind of hit that inflection point in 2020. And I believe the current traditional legacy fiat system also hit an inflection point in 2020. Lynn Alden kind of shows that there's kind of two stages to a long-term debt cycle. And at the end of these 80-year long-term debt cycles, eventually a government is going to have an unsustainable debt burden. And after they've lowered interest rates to zero, a government only has one more choice to keep kicking that can and to try to deleverage its massive debt balance. And that is to simply print money. And it's really interesting that when we go back and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but there's been 52 governments since the year 1800 that have hit debt to GDP levels of 130% or higher. And on average, 51 of those 52 countries defaulted on their debt within 15 years of them reaching that 130% debt Rubicon. So I believe it's interesting that America, the global reserve currency, breached that 130% debt Rubicon in 2020. And if you look at history, America has a 98% chance of defaulting on that debt in the next 15 years. So I believe that, we have that study from Hirschman Capital, and we also have Lynn Alden's kind of thesis saying, hey, look, typically the government deleverages its balance sheet in like a 10-year period that she calls the second stage of a long-term debt cycle. I believe that's what the 2020s are. I think the 2020s is going to be a decade where inflation is systematically higher than what we've seen over the past 80 years. And it's all a function of debt. And I think it's going to be a massive advertisement for Bitcoin to see global inflation continuing to ravage all around the world.
Yeah, and if I could try to summarize that in a super simple way as best I can, let's say step one, government decides X thing is a problem, we need to fix this. So step two, they print a bunch of money. Here's $1 trillion, we'll just throw it at it and see what happens, and hopefully it gets fixed. Number three, this money printing that they just initiated will create the inflation because every dollar created is diluting the total supply of dollars. It's just making the rest of the supply worthless. After that, they go into debt because when they print this money, they owe it back. Then to get out of that debt, they have no other choice but to make the debt they've accumulated worthless by just printing more and more and more and just turning into a full-blown money printing fest. And so it's just a runaway freight train. And this is something I feel so many people don't even think about when they're watching the news and they see these headlines that, oh, government passes bill for X trillion dollars for X thing. And they just think, oh, that's good. I care about that thing. So that's good. It'll go toward that and it'll make things better and it'll be great. And I remember personally, I would always hear this there is no free lunch trope sort of thrown around, but I never really fully understood what the consequences are of this. And the consequences, I would say, in a very generalized nutshell, is every single time you see the government spending money, it's coming out of nowhere.
Mm.
And all it's doing is just sucking the money out of everybody else. It is literally a stealth tax. It's taxing people, and it's most people don't even know it. And that's the reason why I went to the grocery store this morning, got some milk, some eggs, and some steak, and it was $85 for just like very minimal amount of stuff. It's crazy. And this is a direct result of all that full process of the government printing this money, exacerbating inflation. And so every single thing that they are doing with this free money printer is just reducing everyone's quality of life. Would you say that's pretty accurate summary
Yeah,
there?
yeah. Robert Breedlove says it well. Like money printing is just a wealth redistribution mechanism. Them printing money on whatever bill that they tell you is helping you, whether that be the Inflation Reduction Act or whether it be the Transgender Act or whatever nonsense we're seeing these days that the government's printing money for. All it's doing is it's just redistributing wealth. So it's taking wealth from those who save money in the currency, and it's essentially creating inflation and creating asset bubbles. So whenever a government prints money, it's hurting the people who save in that money, and it's essentially boosting asset prices. That's a really simplified way to think about it.
And that's kind of a good transition into sort of a libertarian rabbit hole that I've been more learning about is just all these things that we're unlearning from a whole lifetime of hearing this stuff all the time and just not thinking anything of it. But even when a government decides we're going to go after this problem by printing a bunch of money, often they have the worst incentive to actually do it correctly because they are, and they're not, the government isn't building the roads. They are getting contractors to build the roads, and they have no
Mm,
incentive to really do a good job because they pay no price for choosing incorrectly in that market of contractors, for this example. Could
mm.
you elaborate a little bit on that and just how deeply misinformed people are to think that the government is the actual thing that's fixing these things rather than just a middleman that does a bad job and is incentivized to not improve?
Yeah, I mean the government's woefully wasteful with what they're doing. I think George Gammon did a tweet yesterday. I forget the context, but essentially the government is spending $640,000 on every homeless person in America. So homeless people are still homeless. They're living on the street. They're getting like bare bones checks. They might be getting $5,000 or $10,000 a year, not 650. Where's the other $640,000 going? It's theft. They're telling you that they're printing money to fight homelessness, and they're telling you that they're printing money to save Ukraine, but they're actually like just funneling it into their own pockets. And that's why you have all of these senators who have net worths of like $10 million, $50 million, and they've supposedly been working their whole lives on like a government official salary. It doesn't make any sense why they're worth tens of millions of dollars unless it's all due to corruption. It's just a ginormous banana republic. That's how you can think of economics and politics in America, but in every other country around the world, we're all tied together. Everybody's a fiat backed absolute mess of a currency, and you have corruption in every single country because that's just the incentives of fiat money.
And this is completely bipartisan. It's on the left and the right, and that's why I
Yeah.
love the graphs coming from accounts like Unusual Whales. It's just showing the red and the blue lines.
Mm.
It's like they're racing to see who can steal the most money.
It's
It's really
exactly what it is.
there is no good guys here. They are all
Mm.
doing it. Some of them are better at acting and pretending that they are doing what's best for us, but it's a shit show. It's a complete shit show, and I tend to simplify it down to that money printing and debt problem. You can really easily measure how much the debt goes up, and every single president just pumps it up because these are human beings that care about their reputation pretty much all the time. So none of them want it to blow up on their watch. No matter how much of a nice, wonderful guy you think any of these presidents are, like so many people think that, oh, Joe Biden's just like a nice grandpa. Like, he has a little bit of trouble talking here and there, but he means the best. Well, he's not going to fix anything. He doesn't know what the fuck's going on. Like he would not be able to explain any of this like you are. He just doesn't get it. He's just a puppet, and it seems that more and more the this I would say like the central bankers and the deep state, if you want to call it that, prefer to have sort of a shell of a puppet there just so they can really pass whatever they want without any real struggle or friction. So that's a little bit deep, but who do you think's really in control here if all of this is going on and the Democrats and Republicans are basically just a shell game of all saying these different things and sort of giving little pieces of candy to their bases that have little policy differences, but they're all just printing money and stealing it?
Yeah. So who's in control? I don't know. But I certainly know that your elected government official or president that you elect in your quote unquote democratic country is not in control. You simply need to look back to 2020 to learn that that's the case. There were 7 presidents who actually opposed, let's just say, mandates to not get your video deleted on YouTube. And
I want my mom to be able to watch this, Luke. Be nice.
I'll be nice. So there's 7 presidents who, let's just say, opposed the global narrative. They said there's going to be no lockdowns here. There's going to be no treatments here. And I believe 6 of those presidents had suspicious and coincidental deaths in the days and weeks following them making that announcement. So you have presidents in Haiti, you have presidents in Burundi, you have presidents, there's a few in Africa, really strange names of countries I just don't remember on the top of my head, but I would encourage the listener to do the research. So I think, like, recent data suggests, obviously, our elected democratic leaders are not in control of things. If I had to speculate, I would say it's maybe people like, the good old World Economic Forum. It's all of these NGOs, so non-government elected institutions. So the IMF, the World Bank, the WEF, the World Health Organization. You simply need to follow the money. So, I mean, the World Health Organization, I believe the second largest donor to the World Health Organization is, surprise, surprise, not a country. It's actually Bill Gates. So if you look at the largest donors to the WHO, it's all the nation states. So America, China, Europe, it's all the nation states. And then strangely, you have Bill Gates in slot number 2 there, second largest donor to the World Health Organization. Who's
and the
also
largest farm owner. He has all kinds of shit going on.
He does. He owns all sorts of shares in, let's just call them, pharmaceutical companies. So obviously, yeah, we don't need to connect too many dots. We can let the listener do that for themselves. But it's just really like, you just simply need to follow the money to learn who actually controls the world. There's a really good graph that kind of floats around, and it shows the nations that don't have a Rothschild central bank installed in the country. And I believe in like the year 2000, there was countries like Algeria, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq. And think about which countries have had the most wars over the past 20 years. Think about them. It's all those countries. So it really does make you think and make you wonder. But essentially, I think the root problem is fiat money and somebody fighting to control the money. If you can control the money, you can control the presidents around the world. We even have the president of Belarus openly saying that in 2020 he was bribed $950 million. Let's be specific. This video can't be taken down. He was bribed $950 million by the IMF to enforce tyrannical lockdowns onto his citizens. And he came out and openly said that. So you got to ask yourself, why is there all these coup attempts in Belarus? Why is Belarus always see these so-called uprisings within its country? Who's funding that? So I would always just encourage the listener, if you want to know who's controlling the world, simply follow the money. And yes, it's a pretty dark rabbit hole. And I have many friends who are stuck down that rabbit hole, seeing the doom and the gloom of the world. And it can be very scary. It can be very frightening. But it's empowering to know that Bitcoin is a solution to that system. So I've opted out of that corrupted system. I don't pay it much attention as I used to. I used to delve down all of these rabbit holes for weeks and months at an end. But so I like to focus my time on the solution, and that is Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was going to add that actually is with just an infinite web of different research holes you can go down and read all these books and listen to all these podcasts. it's kind of a choose your own adventure of how fucked up is everything right now. But I would agree with you, though. It's important to have a clear idea of what am I going to focus on? What something that you can chew on, something you can bite off and chew on is not just a whole giant mess of meat that you're trying to figure out where, and you're changing all the time. That just becomes overwhelming. So I would say central banking. The fact that
Mm.
we have banks that print money, it's I would call that the lifeline of pretty much all of these institutions that are causing these problems. So to me, I would consider that and shout out to Mark Moss, who I know you have a connection with. He says the money printer is the Death Star. Just destroy the money printer and everything else will organically heal because we'll no longer have this mechanism that can just funnel free money into the politicians, these corrupt institutions, the NGOs, like you were talking about. It all just comes down to it's a race to increase their power so they can suckle on the tit of the Fed, essentially. And so the people that have the more power, it's a proof of stake system, like you said, and it just becomes this self licking ice cream cone of power, power, power. And only psychopaths are able to make it to that level, and then their family gets brought into it, and it just continues building on itself. And I would rather just focus on the heart of the beast, which is the central banking money printer. Would you agree with that as like the main focus for you?
Yeah, I like to just. I think money is the root of everything. Money is one half of every economic transaction. If the money is broken, everything else in society is eventually going to become fractured, distorted, and not in line with reality. If the money is not in line with reality.
So another thing I wanted to talk to you about is cycles, revolutionary
Mm.
cycles. That's something that you've done a lot of work on. I know you put out a lot of pieces on that. I'm not sure if you've been as deep in recent weeks specifically, but you and Mark Moss both have been my go-to resources for just tracking these crazy cycles throughout history, how revolutions come about, and there's just a crazy amount of things that just continue repeating over and over and over through the centuries and even millennia for humans. And it's been quite eye-opening for me that humans are pretty fucking simple. Like we keep falling into the same traps over and over again. We keep falling into the same habits on a long enough time frame. Could you give a summary on which cycles you follow the most closely? Which ones are converging right now? Because I know that that's something you follow, and I don't know if you have them in front of you, but if you could just go over each of those and how crazy it is that we're facing a convergence right now.
Yeah, definitely. So the high level thesis for why I believe the world is so absolutely ridiculous today is the fact that we have all of these cycles that are operating on different time frames, and they're all unwinding or actually unfolding and converging today in the 2020s. So the fourth turning cycle, that's a 90-year cycle, and every 90 years, like absolute clockwork, America sees a massive civil war or rise of populism, and we essentially reset the game board, tear down institutions, and we rebuild institutions every 90 years. We can probably get into detail with each cycle a little bit later, but the fourth
Do you
turning,
happen to remember which ones, if we just track back as a little
yeah,
bit of proof of that?
yeah. So 90 years ago today, that was between 1929 and 1945. That was the last fourth turning cycle that Neil Howe says we were actually living through. And in that time, what did we see? We saw World War II. We saw the rise of Hitler, the rise of Mussolini. America kind of got turned into a socialist state a little bit with the FDR New Deal in the 1930s. We got Executive Order 6102. So we saw a massive crisis. So every fourth turning, the authors Strauss and Howe say you will see a crisis for 22 years, or a fourth turning they call it, which is a little segment of that 90-year cycle. And then at the end of that fourth turning cycle, at the end of that 22-year period, we rebuild institutions. So we saw the building of the World Bank, the IMF, the 1944 Bretton Woods monetary agreement, where we all collectively, as the world, agreed that the US dollar would be the global reserve currency, and it was supposed to be pegged to gold until 1971. So that was the last fourth turning. If you go 90 years before then, it takes you back to the 1860 Civil War, which was the most brutal war in American history. If you look at it on a percentage basis, 90 years before then, you've got the American and the French revolutions. So you track that 90-year fourth turning cycle back for the past 500 years, you have a crisis every single 90 years. Then you have other cycles unwinding on different timeframes. So we have the 80-year long-term debt cycle. We talked about that earlier, and I believe we're in that last 10 years of the 90-year, 80-year long-term debt cycle. And again, the fourth turning cycle is supposed to be unwinding between 2007 and 2029, or 2030 for simplified thinking for the people. So we have those two cycles. You also have the 250-year revolutionary cycle unwinding today. So every 250 years, we see a major revolution. So in the 1520s, we saw the separation of church and state, which was brought about by the printing press. 250 years later, in the 1770s, we saw the two largest revolutions happen in different parts of the world, kind of. We saw the French Revolution and the American Revolution. What's 250 years forward from the 1770s? Pops you into the 2020s, and I think Bitcoin. I like to trigger some people. I call Bitcoin a digital printing press because I think it's going to do the same thing that the printing press did. It's going to democratize and decentralize information, but it's also going to do that to money, the same way the printing press did in the 1500s. And the printing press separated church and the state. I believe Bitcoin is going to actually separate money from state. So there's a little bit of an analogy there. I know others have also pointed to that. So they're the three cycles so far: revolutionary, long-term debt, fourth turning. We also have other cycles such as the 50-year technological cycle. So every 50 years since the 1770s, we've seen a new technological revolution spring up that's absolutely changed the world. So obviously we've got the Industrial Revolution in the 1770s, then we had the invention of railways, the steam engine, electricity, steel, the automobile in the early 1900s, and then 50 years later in the 1960s, we saw the microprocessor. What's 50 years forward from 1961? Well, it's 2011, and Bitcoin was invented in 2008. Pretty interesting, pretty poetic. And then we have these other cycles, such as the sovereign individual. So this isn't so much as a cycle, but the sovereign individual was a book written in 1997, to be correct. And it just shows, hey, look, throughout human history, technology changes things, and we've seen three major shifts in how us humans have organized and kind of cooperated at scale. And these have been influenced by changes due to technology. So for hundreds of thousands of years, we were hunters and gatherers. Until 10,000 years ago, we saw the agricultural revolution. And then that centralized everybody into farms and villages, plowing the fields. And that was the first time in human history that we actually saw money or excess or capital. Because when you plow those fields, naturally, we actually started to have excess grains left over. We can get into that later. But that was the first major shift, agricultural revolution, 10,000 years ago. The next major shift was again made by technology, and that was the Industrial Revolution in the 1770s. The 1770s, with the Industrial Revolution, took everybody from those farm villages and put them in these big mega cities where all of the work was. And the sovereign individual says we are on the verge of the next major transformation in how we actually organize as a society. And they make the case, again, this was written in 1997, that decentralized technologies would shrink the nation state and lead to this absolute boom of decentralization and deglobalization. So just think about the rise of the digital nomads. People are now jumping around from nation state to nation state because they can now work anywhere in the world. So the internet is a decentralizing technology. It enables the little guy. It doesn't enable the state. So they said for the first time in human history, we are actually watching a major technological shift that is going to actually decentralize people and humanity away from these steps of centralization that we have seen since the agricultural revolution. So they said that, in the 1990s, we are on the verge of that cycle happening now. I think in the 2020s, we're kind of in the verge of that happening right now. So they're just a few of the cycles, a number of the cycles that are unwinding today in the 2020s. And it's really interesting. I think Bitcoin is the solution to all of these cycles.
It's so fascinating how they all come together and just continue repeating so consistently. And the visual is really incredible. I'll make sure to link your Big Bang Theory series in the show notes with all the pictures to show those lines. Um, you
Thank you, my
mentioned
friend.
1971 in there.
Mm.
That's kind of an interesting year, isn't it? What happened in 1971, dude?
Lots happened in 1971. So obviously, Nixon took America off the gold standard. So America essentially implicitly defaulted on their debt in 1971 when they said to the world, sorry, your US dollars are no longer redeemable for gold. He told the French president, send your battleship back to your own country. We're not giving you any gold, because the French at that time were filling up their boats with US dollars, sending them to America, trying to redeem them for the gold that the US dollar promised was backing the US dollar. But we all know America, especially throughout the 1960s, was aggressively expanding its money supply. Sorry, it was fighting the Vietnam War, and you can see the massive deficits America was running in the 1960s. They were printing more paper money than they had for the gold to actually back it up. So 1971, we officially ended the gold standard, and we kind of moved into, for the first time in human history, a global fiat system. The entire world is operating on fiat currencies, and that's something we've kind of never seen throughout human history before. Yes, we've seen lots of fiat currencies experimented on in the past few hundred years. I think China created the first one in like around 1,000 years ago, the first paperback money. But we've never, normally you've seen like gold standards in other countries, while a Germany would go and hyperinflate their currency. So we're at a global fiat standard that was created by 1971. I think that's really interesting and really noteworthy. I can't remember if the Department of Energy was created in 1971. I believe it could have been. But I think it's really interesting, for the first time in 250 years, the amount of energy per capita that our civilization has been using has actually declined, and it peaked in the 1970s. And I think energy is human flourishing. So that also happened in 1971, a little bit of a curveball to throw in there. I believe that institution was created. But again, like, we need to revert back to the mean. We've been distorting reality for over 50 years now, since 1971. And the further we distort reality, the more weird things get. So obviously we have all of this just madness in the world today. I don't want to name and shame anything, but it's just, society doesn't make sense. And we see all of these episodes of mass formation psychosis pop up whenever a money breaks. So even it's dated back in when the Roman Empire collapsed and the money was breaking really badly. You saw all of these episodes of just cultural decay. So people obsessed with sex and prostitution and, cheating on wives and all of this just disgusting things. That was popular in the Roman Empire. And the same thing in the German hyperinflation in the 1920s. You saw lots of these very strange cultural breaks and fractures. So I think that's where we are, and the fact that we did have that Nixon shock in 1971, I believe, explains most of the madness we do see in the world today.
And this is the first time ever there is a mainstream media arm of the government who are able to funnel resources into these channels like Fox, CNN, MSNBC to essentially keep people distracted by the red team versus blue team shenanigans and not realize that this is going on. And to them, the more distractions, the better, because they're the ones that are on the hook for all this whole mess, and they don't want it to end. They like the gravy train. So I know you got something to run to here soon. So maybe one last quick question to wrap up that 1971 piece. How does scarcity fix this problem? Because before that, we had gold for thousands of years, which was relatively very scarce compared to fiat, which is infinite. What is it about having something with a capped supply that is so powerful in keeping the cultural fabric together, preventing all these problems we're seeing? And how will Bitcoin do that even better than gold did?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually do a two birds with one stone kind of attempt here, because I didn't answer an earlier question where you were talking about the fact that technology is supposed to make things cheaper. So if you look back at a 400-year chart of inflation, you'll see that the price of goods and services would actually naturally oscillate between inflation and deflation all throughout the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and then 1913 happened. And since then, over the past 100 years, all we've seen is inflation. And it's strange, and most people don't understand just how messed up things are, but the cost of goods and services should be getting cheaper every single year, okay? Is society getting better? Is society getting more efficient at making goods and services? Are we making cars faster? Are we electrifying the world faster? Yes, technology is getting better, so the cost of goods and services should be getting cheaper. And most people don't even think about that. But that's like layer one of society. The cost of goods and services should be getting cheaper. And when things aren't getting artificially inflated, you don't need to stress about money, okay? When the money is not broken, you shouldn't have to worry about gambling in the stock market or trying to flip your secondhand car for a profit or all of these other gambling type activities that happen every single time a currency breaks. That's what we're seeing in the world today, and returning to a fixed money supply like Bitcoin will actually hopefully return society back to actually being prosperous once again. Because it's no surprise we had the Renaissance in the 1600s, and people and society made some beautiful buildings when the money was actually sound, okay? When the money is sound, you can actually plan for the future. And you can build a cathedral that takes 100 years to construct, okay? Instead of trying to construct these paper cardboard houses that we're building today. Like, it's no surprise that the buildings and everything else in society is just cheap plastic crap these days. It's because the money's broken. If the money's inflating at 10% per year, you cannot possibly plan to build this big building that takes more than 10 years to build. Because by the 10 years has gone past, half of your money's inflated away because the money's broken. So returning the world back to a sound money is going to do so much good for the world. And it's going to actually enable the entrepreneur and the businessman to do what he does best. And that is innovate. That is the division of labor. That's what has brought us through thousands of years of evolution. We don't barter anymore. We actually use money to excel and accelerate civilization. So returning humanity back to a sound money standard is going to push us forward on an exponential path of progress, I believe. And as I laid out in the first kind of series of articles I wrote in 2021, Bitcoin is the big bang to end all of these cycles of booms and busts. I believe that when the money is fixed, I think you're going to fix a lot of the cultural booms and busts and irregularities that you do see every 90 years in the fourth turning. So Bitcoin is the big bang.
Yeah, like you said, these workers and creators of the world, the architects, the doctors, the artists, they have to become part-time investors now because they can't just save their money. Or it goes towards zero forever. It's melting away
Exactly.
in their bank account. And that fix the money, fix the world, man. That was, you had a big poster in your old room that said that. I know you named your YouTube channel that, so I know that's big for you, and I think that's a great explanation for why Bitcoiners are so focused on the money itself. It's such a crucial part of society, and when it is gone off the rails like it has more than any time ever right now, it answers a lot of questions. It starts making sense of why things are so crazy and why so many people are having so much trouble staying rooted in reality, living healthy lives, finding time to exercise, date, eat healthy food. They can't do any of these things because they're stuck on a hamster wheel of just being able to feed themselves and pay rent. And once you fix that, people have some breathing room again. That's the beginning of something beautiful. And I think we're both on the same page thinking that starts with re-implementing a scarce commodity money that cannot be manipulated, because anytime it can be manipulated, it will be. It's just a matter of time. And we're watching that in front of our very eyes. It's tragic and fascinating at the same time. And we're on the same boat there. All right, man, I know you got to run. So, one final question here to wrap things up that I will be asking everybody is, if you had to summarize the message that you want to share with the world in a single shareable clip, what would it be?
Geez, I love that question. That's a great one.
Everyone has their thing that they stick with at the end. It just seems like a great one. I love it.
Yeah, so fix the money, fix the world. I've dedicated my life to fixing the money because I think it's the single best thing and the single most impactful problem that we can solve.
Amazing, dude. I appreciate you so much for carving out the time. Enjoy your dinner, and we'll be in touch, dude. We both are flying all over the place. We may meet up in Colombia or El Salvador or Costa Rica one of these days. We'll find out, but I'm really looking forward. We were probably 100 yards away from each other in Miami 22. Do you remember that? We were trying to meet up.
Yeah, I remember that.
Busy lives. We were so close to meeting, but it's going to happen one of these times. I can't wait, man. It's great talking to you as always, and appreciate you, brother.
I look forward to catching you too. It's funny. I'm going to miss Ben by about a week here in Colombia. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, leaving the country.
Again.
Yeah, I know. But thank you so much for having me, my man. It was an absolute blast.
See you later, brother. Have a good one.
See you, man.